As I've been rewatching The Sopranos with my wife, all I could help but think the whole time is this would be a lot better if Richie the Hammer would show up. Some guys, a lot of guys, don't believe what they are seeing, especially if it gets in the way of what they eat or drink or think or believe. Like, I don't believe in God, but if I saw him, I would. I wouldn't just go around saying, Jesus, that was a great special effect. The definition of an asshole is a guy who doesn't believe what he's seeing. In many ways, the world is nothing but a pile of shit. But it can also be very beautiful. It's hard for a man to give up all those pleasures, even when they don't pleasure him no more. I feel that if I'm going through this hellish decline, you should be going through one also. Misery loves company. And I guess we've all got a streak of 100% gold-plated bastard in our natures, tangled up so tightly with the good part of us that we can never get free of it. Things hurt more when you were alone. That was all. It's the people who aren't scared who die young. If you think someone is seriously on the prod for your ass, it keeps you awake. Because if you don't have someone to run out of town once in a while, how are you going to know if you yourself belong there? It seems hard to say anything that isn't the wrong thing. Sometimes the gods give you a break. It's easy to blame, easy to want revenge, but when you look at things closely, you start to see that every event is locked onto every other event. That sometimes things happen just because they happen. None of us like to think that's so, because then we can never strike out at someone to ease the pain. We have to find another way, and none of the other ways are so simple or so satisfying. There are no curses, only mirrors you hold up to the souls of men and women. So eat hearty. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back to take you into the multiverse again, guys, because it is the 40th anniversary of Thinner by Richard Bachman, the Stephen King pseudonym. So, New American Library was a publisher that put out the Richard Bachman books at the time. And they got hundreds of letters after this came out, protests saying they felt like Richard Bachman was just stealing Stephen King's writing style. So a little bit of sleuthing did happen, and the cat was finally out of the bag. This was the book where people finally realized it was actually Stephen King. And I think he was happier for it, as we would see later on when he wrote The Dark Half. He was kind of relieved that this was kind of the secret was now out or whatever. But after that did happen, obviously the book sales for Thinner went up 100-fold, and it just became a big hit. And it was one of those kind of things where it was mixed on the criticism. People really loved the writing style, but they might not like the story so much. Whereas it comes to me, I love this story. I'm going to say that up front, guys. If you're hoping for someone to trash this book, you've come to the wrong place. I love this book, and I'm going to kind of talk about why. So this was adapted into a film in 1996, and that'll probably come up. And I really think that's why a lot of people have the negative feelings towards this book. But we will not talk about the movie as much as we are here today to talk about the book, released in 1984. I can't believe it's 40 years old, but hey, what luck that it came into the timing of Into the Multiverse at this time. So let's begin, guys, like usual, by talking about what is this book about. Now, attorney Billy Halleck seriously enjoys living his life of upper-class excess. He's got it all: an expensive home in Connecticut, a loving family, and 50 extra pounds that his doctor repeatedly warns will be the death of him. Then, in a moment of carelessness, Halleck commits vehicular manslaughter when he strikes a jaywalking old woman crossing the street. But Halleck has some powerful local connections and gets off with just a slap on the wrist, much to the fury of the woman's mysterious and ancient father, who exacts revenge in a single word: Thinner. Now a terrified Halleck finds the weight once so difficult to shed dropping effortlessly and rapidly by the week. Soon there will be nothing left of Billy Halleck, unless he can somehow locate the source of his living nightmare and reverse what's happened to him before he utterly wastes away. Guys, this takes us all the way back 40 years ago. This is Thinner. But like at this point, everybody kind of knows what the synopsis for the story is, because it's just kind of like taking on like a myth of its own. But I think that dealing with the idea of gypsy curses is nothing new. But when Stephen King does it, it's obviously going to take a new little spin. So what gets into what makes it good or bad? I'll begin with the good here. One of my favorite side characters in the entire multiverse is Richie the Hammer Janelli. I think this guy is just so amazing. Is he over the top? Yes. Is there a lot of stereotypes there? Absolutely. Is he a ton of fun? Definitely. I think this character is just so great. But what makes it so amazing is that he's not a good person. And talking about the Sopranos riff, it's kind of like when you're watching The Sopranos and you're like, wow, these are really bad people, but I like them because you know you've grown to like them. That's how you feel about Janelli here. You really do like him, even though he's doing some really he's committed some major atrocities here. He's obviously not a good person. He's done some really, really bad things, but he genuinely cares for Billy. And I find that just so endearing. And look, I'll be honest, this book has no business having as great of a friendship story in it that it does. But the friendship between Billy and Richie is one of my favorites in all of the multiverse. It's so wholesome. It's so genuine. But also at the same time, you're like, these are not good people. These are really, really bad guys. But you just find yourself really being invested in that friendship. At least I do. I just love it. I can't get enough of these two, the way they interact with each other, the way that Richie, obviously, he has no filter. He's going to say what he's thinking, and it always just kind of comes across what Billy needs to hear, because he's not going to sugarcoat anything, but he does genuinely care. Like when Billy's really, really starting to waste away, Richie's really there for him. You know, he will do anything for him. And it's a lot of people feel like, oh, it's just because he owed him a favor. But you could tell he cares about Billy. And to me, that just means something, because most times a character like this is cold and heartless, and Richie has a ton of heart for a guy that's just considered such a monster. So even when Richie is doing, really just sleazeball things, I can't help but applaud as a reader, because I appreciate the way he does stand up for his friend. That's really, really genuine. It's kind of like cheering for the bad guys, the heels in wrestling. It's like, you're not supposed to, but you just enjoy it so much. So again, it's unusual for me to really feel that way about a secondary character, as well as someone who's really just not a good guy at the end of the day. And by the way, play to perfection by Joe Mantegna in the film. Like, so much so, I believe he does the audiobook for this, which is just, I love a good race against the clock. Any story that has a good race against the clock, and this one has that clock that's ticking just a little bit faster as you're seeing, Billy, you don't have very much real estate left to lose here before, you just turn into a skeleton. But it's he's literally wasting away. Time just keeps ticking by faster and faster. But the different curses, rather, it's really, really cool the way that all the curses for all the people that get cursed by this gentleman are different. It's not, everybody doesn't get the same thing. Obviously, Billy was really fat and gluttonous, so, he puts this curse on him. And I won't ruin what the other curses are, but they apply to something, a characteristic of the other people that are involved with this little slap on the wrist that Billy gets away with. And it's really cool, and it really gets horrifying in some respects. So I feel like Bachman stuff is usually pretty either dystopian or kind of level-headed, in grounded, rather. Not level-headed, but level-headed is a really, really bad word for a Bachman book. It's more grounded. There's not really much of the supernatural going on, where this does just kind of lean into it. This does feel like a perfect marriage of Bachman and Stephen King stuff. But he always writes so much more angry as Bachman, and that's prevalent here, because I feel like Billy has a really negative outlook on life. He does. Whereas, sometimes he's trying to grasp on a hope, but this just makes it a little worse. And I feel like with this going on, obviously he's going to be in a really, really negative space, and he is very vocal about it. And the bad language is turned up to 11, even for a Stephen King book in this one. So you've got a lot of those things, but I love the way he writes so angry when he writes as Bachman, and that was something that was like even more after we knew who he was, and he was writing the Dark Half, and he was kind of describing that different sides of himself. It was really, really cool the way that's why I think Dark Half is just so appreciative, because it's just so damn meta. But again, this isn't about the Dark Half, but with Thinner, I love how he writes angry as Bachman. He does a really good job of getting those things across here, and that negative outlook on life. Now, for me, I think the ending is absolutely amazing. Is it going to leave a smile on your face? Probably not. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, have you guys been reading this story? You've been paying attention? This isn't a happy, feel-good story. It really isn't, and these aren't good people. I think the ending is amazing, but it is very, very divisive. Very divisive, and not in the usual Stephen King way of, oh, he can't write an ending, which, again, I disagree with. This is just one of those where some people think it's just too dark, and it's very dark. Personally, though, it's one of my favorite endings that he's written. I think it's just incredible that he had the balls to put an ending like this in a book like this. So I think it's great, but again, that is some things that some people do complain about. That leads me to guys to what maybe is not so good. Now, these are things that aren't necessarily bad per se, but there's things I want to make you aware of. King admittedly kind of was lazy on the language for the gypsy people. He did admit that he had no idea. So when he wanted to have some dialogue from them, is he went to the Czechoslovakian translated versions of some of his books and put some lines verbatim from those into the story. And he's since apologized for that, saying that he was very, very lazy with that and very insensitive, and he shouldn't have done that. There's all kinds of trigger warnings for this, even more so than a usual Stephen King book. I feel like you go into a Stephen King book, you're expecting that someone, when you're controversial as a writer as him, you're going to upset some people, and this has a lot of outdated themes. Obviously, a lot of stereotypes of the gypsy people, a lot of stereotypes of Italians, kind of saying that all Italians are involved in organized crime. I think you got to accept that a book like this, it's always going to be a little bit over the top. You just kind of roll with that, and you don't take it too seriously. But, again, a writer as controversial as Stephen King, a book that's 40 years old, yeah, there's going to be some outdated themes on there, but there's violence on women, there's bad guys getting away with it. And again, your two protagonists are not moral people. They really are not. They will do anything to serve number one. They really, really will. So saying the ending is too grim is probably an understatement. But I do think that a lot of people might get turned off by it. They might be throwing the book across the room, I guess. And again, the bad language when he's writing as Bachman is always going to be really, really nasty. But when you're dealing with the content that Stephen King writes about, I don't think that bad language should be a barrier for you. But guys, why should you read it? Look, if you want to see what King was like before he pulled his punches, because I do feel like the latter half of his career, obviously post-kids, entering into sobriety and things, there's some things he doesn't quite go as dark as he would. Like I think about the Billy, because there's a Billy in this story. The Bill Hodges trilogy, there's one section that I still go back to and be like, man, King back in his day, he would have been vicious and he would have killed that character, and he won't do it. So that's just an example. I feel like back then he had no problem doing the really, really dark and nasty stuff to his characters. He really didn't. So you really are interested in that, plus with that little bit of Bachman anger that he puts on things, I think this would be a really, really fun experience for you. If you like kind of the buddy cop format with a twist, now obviously they're not cops, but it is very much that kind of format. Think like a Lethal Weapon, where you've got your Briggs and your Murtaugh, but, they're on the other side of the law, and they're a race against the clock, and they're trying to get the bad guy. I think that it's a format that I think works really, really well, and it's one that I wish that King would do as good as this ever again, because I really just, if you're really going to get into some really bad guys, and you're going to kind of make them be loved somehow, I really feel like this should be the formula that he does follow, because I just love it. You don't mind a grim story maybe, where the bad guys get away with murder a little bit, both literally and figuratively, I think this would be one that you do rather enjoy. And guys, it's only like 200 pages. It's a really short book. You will fly through it. When I did my reread a couple years ago, I read it in about a day and a half, and I just ate it up. And I just love it, guys. And that leads me into my final thoughts here. I have no clue why this book gets dragged so much by Stephen King fans. This is always routinely near the bottom of the rankings of most people I see. I have no idea why. It's one of those, like, did I read the same book? So when I reread it in like 2021, something like that, I was like, no, this is still great. I have no idea why people don't enjoy this. Personally, I think people saw the movie and they hated the movie, and those lines got blurred, and they just kind of decided that it's just not a good story because they didn't like that movie. Again, though, it's one of my favorite bad movies. I get maybe because I do love this book so much, and again, Joe Mantegna is just so damn good as Richie. But it's bleak, and it has some of his most damaged characters. And King writes damaged characters just so well, because he pours a little bit of his own damages into these characters. And it's never been more prevalent than it is here with Billy, I feel like. But it's fast-paced. It has a killer premise, a hell of a hook on page 1, where you think you just cannot stop putting it down. It's very much a thriller horror story. And besides Long Walk, without a doubt, this is my favorite Richard Bachman story. It's just one that has always stuck with me, mostly due to that friendship between those two characters, much more than everything else that happens in the book. Really, I really, really appreciate the duo here. It really is just one of my favorite all of the multiverse. Speaking of said multiverse, there are a couple of Multiverse Connections. Now, these are not what I would call spoiler, but I like to let people know if you don't want to know anything about the multiverse. I'm not going to ruin anything for you with these, but you don't want to know. Just want to let you know up front. And these will talk about a couple things in other books. Usually, Richard Bachman stuff doesn't really connect with the multiverse because obviously he was writing as someone else. He didn't want to make those connections to his stories. But this has a couple. Dark Tower, Richie Janelli, he owns the Three Brothers restaurant, where there is the shootout in the Drawing of the Three. He's also mentioned by name in Drawing of the Three. The Regulators, this one's kind of, Audrey visits Mohonk, is that what it's called? And Billy and his wife do visit Mohonk as well in this book. And I guess you just say kind of miscellaneous, as where it's just kind of being self-aware, is that Billy's doctor does say, you sound like you're in a Stephen King novel at one point in this book. So that's a fun little nod. Again, remember, this was written before it had been revealed. And lines like that make me think he wanted to let the cat out of the bag. He wanted people to know that this was actually him. And I think he was better off for it. But guys, that is Thinner. I love this story. And I have no idea why it gets dragged so much. It's just so much fun. It's so grim. It's so dark. I love all these things. I read Stephen King because I want to go to that dark, dark place, And when I can get really great character relationships on top of it, the guy's a master at it. He really is. He is a wizard. And to me, this one feels, like I said, the perfect marriage between Bachman and King, because it really does feel like all those things I love about King, and then with like the anger and the darkness of Bachman kind of put in there. So to me, this was the top of the mountain. And I'm just so happy that we got it. In 40 years, if you haven't read it yet, man, do yourself a favor. Ignore the movie. Read the book. I think you will have a good time with it. At least you won't feel like you wasted your time while reading it. And it's not a very heavy commitment. And again, the audiobook is ℓ𝕤𝕤𝕤𝕤, who is just excellent. And you know what? After you read the book, go back and revisit the movie and say, it's just an awesomely bad, great movie. So there we go. It really is. So that's what I have about Thinner, guys. Have you read it? What did you think? Why don't you drop in the comments and let me know? No curses are involved. So hit me in the comments, guys, and I will talk to you there.